Okay, here we are back on a Monday night. Hi, Richard.
Hi, everybody.
It's been 2 weeks, and it seemed like the longest 2 weeks ever. It was kind of weird. Every week, Monday kind of sneaks up on me because I'm like, oh, I got to do something Monday night. And then last week, we took a break for Memorial Day, and then it felt like the longest, the longest break ever. It's so weird. I feel like this is a new thing that I'm starting over. Strange. I don't know. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, I feel the same. It seems like it's been a long time since we've been on this screen. So.
Yeah. I had to remember to comb my hair and put on earrings. So welcome everyone who's watching online. We have some great guests today. My name is Letty. This is a space I'm providing through Epic Consulting, and this is Richard from Bakersfield College. And today we're going to continue the conversation about So You Want to Talk About Race by Ijeoma Oluo, and we're on chapter 14 now. So we've been doing this for quite a while. I've loved this time. These conversations have been great. Today we're talking about chapter 14, which is, what is the model minority myth? That's the topic. It's the question that she poses in the chapter, and then tries to kind of educate us. The terms that seem pretty simple. I feel like that's one of the reasons why we love dealing with this book in this way, because it's very approachable, the language. And I feel like I understood it more. I feel like I had a vague idea of what this was. I remember studying it a little bit, but never in any real depth, just for me thinking that the model minority myth had something to do with Asian Americans. Like that was like the extent of my knowledge about it. What about you?
Yeah, I'm in that same boat, and I think that when I was reading this chapter, again, it was almost I felt bad because I'm looking thinking, oh yeah, that was me, and growing up and having, you know, I had a pretty diverse neighborhood growing up, and but thinking back on the assumptions that just came across, you know, assuming that somebody was really good at math because they were Asian, and you know, just those kinds of things. But I do think that I hadn't really considered the danger of the thought on model minority, and she talks about that in the book, and that's the part that I think that needs a really good discussion, and just understanding that, you know, if there's a model minority, is there a sort of a problem minority, and she talks about that a little bit, and that's the part that disturbs me. Suddenly, I'm like feeling like really ashamed of myself, you know, because I did have that feeling like, oh, you know what, Asians got it pretty good, you know, and in our country, and you know, why can't other minorities get in line, and you know, yeah, so it'll be interesting. This will be an interesting conversation.
Yeah. Well, thanks for admitting that those thoughts cross your mind. That can be difficult sometimes for people. I think that acknowledging that if there is such a thing as a model anything, that means that everything else is not less than, can be picked apart, can be labeled in negative ways. So I think acknowledging that, right? If there's good, there's evil. There's always that sort of thing. Okay, I don't want to just keep talking about what we think. I want to learn. I want to create a different kind of space here, not just us. So let's see. Who shall we bring on first? Let's bring on Natalie, because she hasn't been on. And we invited Natalie to come on and have this conversation. She's, well, I'll just let her introduce herself and talk about what she's doing. Welcome, Natalie.
Hi.
Hey, Natalie.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome from Spokane Public Schools.
Well, I work for Spokane Public Schools. I am currently working at Rogers High School, which is one of the poorest schools in Washington, so very, very high need. I actually went there myself, so it's really cool going back. I chose to jump on for this chapter because this is what I knew the least about. Like I can't personally relate to this experience. So I was like, yeah, I'll check that one out and see if I can, learn something. I was pretty limited in what I knew as well. I was just kind of like, they have it pretty good. However, we recently have just a large population of Islander students in our district, and so I'm learning a lot. And I was comparing it, and it just was such a different experience. I was really thankful for this chapter because it really hits on that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you for sharing. And you're in Spokane. Okay, I'm going to bring Ben on next. The two people who haven't been on this show before. So let's talk to Ben, and welcome to the broadcast.
Hi, everybody. How's everyone doing today?
Really good. Welcome.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for bringing me on. I think, this idea of a model minority is so important and relevant right now. It's very timely, right, as we're discussing issues related to anti-Asian hate. And this is coming on the back end of some very public and continued overt acts of racism towards the Black community. And we can see as the Asian community, we're trying to wrestle with these things. So some of those acts, those discriminatory acts towards Asian peoples in our country have been seemingly benign, like being called the model minority. It seems like a good thing. And as a student, I always recall, I know this to be true. Like I'll say, teachers would see Nakamura down on the roster, especially for a math class, and they'd be like, yes, this is going to be a high performing student. And so I have received a lot of benefits, quote unquote, from being granted that term of the model minority. However, any term that is given to individuals, an entire people group based on race, is discriminatory and biased, and it serves to marginalize. And I think that's the purpose of any of these stereotypes, are to enact the ideals of white supremacy, which is to keep people of color, to keep all marginalized people separated. So long as you can keep us separated and oppressed, then you can continue to do things that are hurtful and harmful for those that we serve. I'm a high school principal. I've been a principal for a little over a decade now, and just me having that awareness, and I appreciate Richard and everybody sharing, that we've held some of these beliefs and thought that they weren't hurtful, and myself included, and then it serves to hinder us from actually seeing our Asian American, our Pacific Islander students. We don't see them because we see the label. And I think that is the greatest damage and detriment, is not seeing the individual, not seeing this monolith of all Asians are X or whatever it is. And it's hurtful, and it hurts us from being able to serve and to love all the students entrusted to our care. So I appreciate being on today, enjoying this conversation. It's exciting.
Yes, thank you for that. And it's going to be great to get the perspective also of an administrator at a high school, right? Nat is at a high school, and then also to have people trained as psychologists. So we're going to bring on Tangela, who has joined us before and will join us again next week. So Tangela, welcome to the broadcast.
Hi guys. Hi again.
Hi.
Well, I can't say I heard the phrase before, and I don't know if it's because I grew up in Mississippi that I knew it was meant to be divisive. I don't know whether it's a good or bad thing, but I am acutely aware of the idea that white is superior and black is inferior. And so there's this idea coined by, her last name is Kim, 1999, racial triangulation, where you have whites here, blacks at the bottom, and then Asians, which is such a broad term. Now, I did learn something new about that. Chinese, Indian, Filipino, Hmong, all those different people thrown into one category. And they're basically in the middle, almost like the middleman, trying to be white adjacent, while also trying to say, I'm not like the black people over here. So I was aware of that only because of growing up in the Deep South, that's always been the intent. So, and I'll also be perfectly candid. I've not had much experience with the Asian community, especially growing up in Mississippi and even now in Oklahoma. Now we have some Indians, some Pakistanis here, but it's not a lot. I don't see a lot of Asians, except now I take that back. It's just one. It's still not a lot. We have one family, and I can't recall where they're from, but yeah, I just knew that it was something divisive because generally speaking, especially in the South, I've just been taught that it's going to be something negative.
Yes. So it can be difficult to define sometimes these terms, but I'm going to use, there's two sort of definitions that she uses to help guide us. So the first one is, she took from the idea that William Peterson, the sociologist William Peterson had developed, sort of like to say, this is why Asian Americans are so successful. So the myth of the model minority has become a collection of stereotypes about Asian Americans, presenting them as the quote ideal minority group in the eyes of white supremacy. So I think it's clear we are dealing with white supremacy, a white supremacist system built specifically so that this can exist within, right? So it's already defining it. We're just breaking down another way that people are divided, like Tangela's saying, Richard was saying, the images that we get, the stereotypes that are just built in. Where do they even come from? Who is that person who first said that to us growing up, right? Was it my parents? I don't know where it came from. I'm in the Central Valley in California, so I feel like there was a lot of diversity, but I can tell you that when I was in high school, and this is no brag, but I had honors classes, and I was one of the few Latinas in the honors classes. But there were white kids and there were Asian kids, and I felt like I was the odd person out, which is strange in where I'm at, because the Latino population is huge here. So I don't know where it came from. If it was pop culture, was I watching something? Was I reading something? Was it in the news? Probably. I don't know. So this idea that because there's this structure that's built on white supremacy, an idea like this can exist, and it exists to be divisive. Any thoughts on this definition?
Yeah, I think, running as a corollary to white supremacy is also anti-blackness. And so the model minority myth really serves those. And the reason you call that out is that they're similar. I mean, it's rooted, it comes from white supremacy, but it really, when you call that out, then you're able to, I think we have to get into the details of it, because like we've said, model compared to what minority, right? And just as, from Mississippi. Oh, Tangela, thank you. Sorry, Tangela. but Tangela was bringing that triangulation up, right? And it's like it paints a picture, an inaccurate picture that enables some of the purposes and intentions of anti-Blackness to really be solidified and accepted. Because really, this idea of the model minority, both of my grandparents were in the internment camps after World War II, right? The bombing of Pearl Harbor, they were in Manzanar. That's where they met. And so this idea of the model minority myth really took hold after the Japanese came back from the internment camps. And there was an article, I think it was in the New York Times, that talked about Japanese Americans essentially picking themselves up by their own bootstrap, right? And so this model minority goes with the same myth of meritocracy. You can pick yourself up by your own bootstrap. And so look at the Japanese. They were in internment camps for a couple of years. How can why can't Black people be as successful as the Japanese? And so what it does is it dismisses and oversimplifies the systematic discrimination, dehumanization country, and it propped up Asians, beginning with Japanese Americans. That's why Japanese Americans, if you look within the Asian community, are the highest of the highest socioeconomic status, because we were given that term of model minority. And so we get some of the benefits of whiteness. We get many of the benefits of white supremacy. And so long as we allow ourselves to be dehumanized, so long as we allow ourselves to not accept our identity, and we have to, kind of choose sides in a way, and we're choosing a side that isn't rooted in our best interests, isn't rooted in truly loving us or loving others, but is rooted in division. So I think that part of white supremacy is important to call that out in the model minority myth, and also that it is rooted in anti-Blackness. I think that's really important.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Natalie, you're muted. Hang on.
There we go. I'm still reacting to Tangela's experience, how Tangela's experience may be different from my own growing up in the Pacific Northwest, and just how you came upon like your understanding of this, through your own experience. And so I was still thinking on that, just on how you had the experience of just, I know this is going to be divisive, so what is it, and it's like, oh, that's, I've experienced division, but I don't believe there's quite as much, especially overt racism. We do have it, but from my experience of being in the South, when I do visit my dad, it's not as overt. Yeah, so yeah, I'm still thinking on that.
Processing.
Yes, processing.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think too that the article that been referenced by William Peterson, there was another one shortly after that regarding Chinese Americans to further solidify that. But a few years prior, I think it was Moynihan who did like this study saying, again, to say that any issues in the Black community are inherent. So there's always been this belief that, which is why I don't like when people try to compare Black people to any other minorities' experiences in America. It is just not the same. If you understand Jim Crow, Black codes, even if you look at all the various things that we went through with chattel slavery and the socialization that we went through. And so when people say pick yourself up by your bootstraps, or why can't you work harder, there were no working people who didn't work any harder than slaves, and they were called lazy. So just this idea of all these negative things being thrown at people, especially Black people, and we just have to be honest that there's a specific hatred for Black people. But in order for white supremacy to exist, you must have something that's inferior. You cannot have, because otherwise you can't be superior without someone else being inferior. So during that time, it was set up, so interesting, during the Civil Rights Movement. So at the same time that was happening, bam, here's the Immigration Act to say that, okay, we're going to let more professional Asians in, and so you set this thing up where they're basically educated, they have a job, they can come here, and it's not to dismiss any hard work, or so no one needs to write into you. I'm not negating any of that, but there is something to be said for refugees coming over and those who voluntarily migrate and they're somewhat established. That is why you have, I think, I don't know, Ben may know more of the communities than I do. I had them written down. I think it's the Cambodians, Lao,
Marshallese.
Say again.
There's Marshallese as well in there.
And
yeah.
When Vietnamese, when they came over as refugees, they didn't have anything. And the interesting thing about poverty is that if it's not intentionally interrupted, it just continues. And that's what has happened to many of them. It's not that they don't work hard. It's just that it's poverty, just like wealth. If you were born into an extremely wealthy family, more than likely you don't have to do much to stay wealthy. It's just the way the system is set up. But I don't mean to hijack it, so I'm
I think it was a great point that Ben brings up about the idea that yes, that white supremacist system exists, but we have to, where did it originate, right? Why does that exist? That allows then all of these other categories in this caste system to also be, labeled and we're all categorized by whatever the white supremacist system decides is valuable. And I mean, we can talk a little bit more about, because I did pull up this as one of our topics when she talks about this exact thing what you were just talking about, Tangela, about, if you have immigrants, migrants, refugees that are coming in, and you're just slapping the Asian label on it, what does that mean for the people who are coming in, working in different kinds of jobs and living in poverty, and they don't have the language and their kids aren't getting the education? So what does that do to that system? Like, are we separating out?
Lack of resources, limited access, definitely some major barriers for growth.
Yeah, not addressing mental health issues if you're a refugee, PTSD, even for children. That's not being addressed because you don't want to say as a model minority that, hey, I'm hurting. I need help. I can't remember the stat I saw about suicide with Asians. And all that pressure, I guess there are two things that can happen with something like any generalization. You could either internalize it or fight against it. And for survival, many people, and I get it, you internalize it. Okay, I'm going to be this great person. Because when a slave could pass for white and someone said, well, I wouldn't do that. You would, if that's the only way you could survive, you would pass as white, because ultimately that's the first thing you think about, is that I want to survive. So not many of them, especially because I decided to go and watch other videos, read other articles by various Asians, the Asian population, because the book is good, but I wanted to understand more. And I was happy to see that many of them, especially the younger generation, are just recognizing this is hurting me. I can't get help in school. One guy said I couldn't get help in school because it was like, oh, you're Asian, you should know this, as if there's some math DNA that's stamped right there. And which is very interesting because you limit people. They can't be more than what you've told them they can be. You have all these Asians who are in these corporations, and then at the same time, you won't promote them to CEO or an executive position. I forget what they call that. I think they call it bamboo ceiling or something like that. I can't remember what I read. Is that what it is?
Yeah, bamboo ceiling. They say, it's not like a glass, and you can see what's above, because there aren't exemplars. There aren't people that have made it there. If you can't test for the position, you're not getting the position. And so like what you put up here, Letty, that K-12 educators believe that Asian American students need less academic resources. It's because you see Asians are seen as a monolith. And so they're seen as, according to certain stereotypes, with certain groups of Asians that came at certain times, maybe like can't come in here already having high levels of educational attainment, recruited to come to this country.
Yeah.
It's very different. Recruited to come here with already a high level of affluence and educational attainment in their home country to come here. That's very different than individuals coming as refugees. That's very different than a lot of, just diverse life experiences. And so as educators, when we see an Asian student struggling, I mean, we've all felt guilty from this because, like I say, white supremacy runs through all of our veins. We've all been traumatized. It's woven into the fabric of every system in our country. And so we internalize those things. We said, you're either internalizing it or fighting against it. And often we internalize that. So I see an Asian student. I mean, I used to be a math teacher and struggling in my math class. It's not intuitive. It's not natural for me to go to the Asian student and provide them that same level of support that I would to another student. And so that's where we really need to be conscious of that, decolonize our mind, do that archaeology of self to discover those areas in our life that we hold some of these biases. I mean, that's why they're called implicit biases. That's what I call them blind spots. Like, I don't know my blind spots. They're my blind spots. So like, I got to rely on others, got to look for, read and lean on others that can help expand my awareness and consciousness so that I don't continue to fall on that path of believing that Asian American students don't need as much academic support or social emotional support.
I know as a mental health therapist, I see a lot higher levels of suicidal ideation. And I started digging a little bit in that because I was interested also while reading the chapter. And they do have higher rates across the board of suicidal ideation. And they're also less likely to utilize the resource of mental health services. So typically when they get to that level, there's higher rates of completion. So not necessarily attempts, but completion of suicide.
Oh, wow.
This idea that in K-12, I mean, probably pre-K, TK, whatever we're calling it, this idea starting from when they are, tiny humans coming into an educational space, kind of creates that for the rest of their lives, right? So what I'm thinking is that when we don't take the time to not just think about, like Tangela, you're saying, we got to name the group. Like Natalie, you're saying, I know, Pacific Islander, what does that mean? And then there's like groups within each one of those labels or categories. But culturally, we're not understanding. And I know I don't want to put this on teachers because teachers do so much and have so much to do. The idea that you're really getting to know the person, because kids are people. We forget that kids are people, like they are people that have their own culture, their own thoughts, their own ideas, their whole hearts and brains, and their families have, they're celebrating things, or they have cultural needs within the family, within their community, religion, whatever it is. And I'm saying all this because I thought of something recently. A local superintendent here had talked to me about how we're communicating or engaging with parents. And she said, it took me a minute to figure out that I really need to figure out what it is that they're wanting from the school. What do they want from us as a district? What do they want from the school for their child and for their community? And she said that they finally got, they were finally able to speak to, I guess, maybe elders, I'll call them elders, but some people in the community that were Hmong. And she said she had never even seen any of the families at any school events or anything. And finally got a translator, was able to communicate to that neighborhood to say, what is it that you want to see here? And then they said they wanted to go onto the campus where their kids were going and bless it. They wanted to bless the campus, and then they felt like then it became part of their community, and they felt more comfortable going to the school because they felt like then it was a part of their family. So just like an interesting, and that's such a simple thing that if you learn that about a community or a group of people, that in the school system or the community, so the neighborhood surrounding that school, that you can have those connections and then learn more about why we're having this, you know, oh, they need less academic resources. If you really get to know the families, and I know we say that to teachers all the time, but something like that, like the celebrating the cultural needs, assessing what is actually important to people as they're raising their kids that we're responsible for, you know, ages 3 to 18. To me, that does a lot. And it said a lot about her to me as a superintendent. And then it said a lot to me about the families willing to say, this is what we'd like to do, and then being able to do it. I don't know how that fits into this conversation. Family better.
No, it's good because it's, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Richard.
Go ahead, Angela. No, you got it.
No, I'm sorry. I was I was just gonna say, I was reminded when I saw the K through 12. It's just about expectations. There's a term called Pygmalion effect, and people will. A lot of students, if teachers have a high expectation, then those students sometimes will live up to the expectations. Whereas with a lot of the time, studies have shown that teachers have a low expectation of Black and brown students. So they live down to that, and they start to experience that. I'm talking grade school. They start to notice differences in kindergarten. Like, this teacher likes this student, and people will say, well, oh, kids don't see color. Why not? They're not blind. They definitely see. They may not have the knowledge or verbiage to engage based on what they see, but they definitely see a difference. They don't run up to me to say, okay, this is my mother. So they notice facial features. They notice all these things, which also reminded me of stereotype threat. And the only reason why I didn't talk about this is because I started working on my PhD in educational psychology. So there are lots of terms like that, stereotype threat, where Black students generally perform poorly on exams when they know they may live down to an expectation. So they immediately become afraid. So it impacts psychologically how they're going to perform, especially on standardized exams. If someone says, well, people like you don't do well. And so it gets into their psyche that they can't do well, even though someone else may come along and say, okay, that's not true. But I don't know what the number is. It's like 1,000 atta girls to, reduce the impact of one negative comment. So when you're socialized to believe that you can't do it, a lot of the times you will just say, forget it. They don't think I can do it anyway. So, but that's my little 2 cents.
That's good. Can I build on what Tangela said? Because it just made me think of something else about those expectations. Students always rise and fall according to our level of expectation, right? They reflect what we project onto them. And I have this saying, it's good, that kids don't listen to us, but they always imitate us. They don't hear our words, but they see our actions. Yeah. And it's those little microaggressions that are cutting. And when you say a micro, it sounds like it's like not dangerous or hurtful, but it does hurt. You start cutting at, yes, every day. See, it's those little microaggressions that cut at right? And so for our brown and Black students, and at the highest, the most pronounced is for our Black students, and even more pronounced for our Black males. But we do see, and there has been an attack on Black female students as well. But historically, like me teaching in a community day school for expelled and incarcerated students, when I was down in Southern California, I had 25 kids in my class that were expelled from the school district, right? 25 out of 25 were male. So there's already a gender discrepancy. 23 out of 25 were Black male students, which comprised about 20%. African-American students comprise about 20% of the population. Black males were about 10%. Why were they 95% of the expelled students in the class? Why? Because we're the most significant adults in students' lives. Like, we got everything together. They think we do, right? So they don't know we don't, but they think we got everything together. We're the most educated people that they see, that we seem to have everything together. And so when we put on students, we're going to have a better day today, aren't we, Letty? You're not going to, well, you're going to try hard today, right? Like those little cuts
Mm-hmm.
at individuals and their continual cuts, and the kids see it. And sometimes they see those cuts and jabs are related to the color of their skin,
Mm-hmm.
to their last name. Then they start to internalize those beliefs that the adults have put upon them.
Yeah.
Start to believe it, and they will rise and fall every time. I mean, even like that old school research, what is her name? You know, where she did that research in that class, it was kind of controversial, where she said like all the blonde hair, blue-eyed kids.
Jane Elliott.
Jane Elliott, yes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you can see that. I mean, that's just, now imagine generation on generation on generation. So now those kids that begin to internalize those belief systems, they grow up to become adults, and they become parents. And they, unfortunately, project those same misbeliefs, those same microaggressions onto their children, which is also supported by the system.
Right.
So we have to not accept these type of microaggressions against Asian Americans, also about calling us a model minority. It seems like a good thing.
Right.
And in some ways there are benefits, but then when something is rooted in hate, you might get a benefit in one area, but it's going to hurt you more in other areas.
Yeah.
Right. So,
it reminds me of tokenism when I was reading this chapter, just because there's, a few allowed at the top, looking kind of racist, and then it also caused division within a group. So when you have that, you get the turning against their own group, some get through, they get access to resources, and and the rest don't. So I don't know. It just reminded me a bit of that. And
absolutely. That, I mean, I think they would use, or as a society would use, model minority versus tokenism, because tokenism sounds bad. But model minority sounds like, you guys, look, we're lifting you up. Somebody has right. There is a comment that's kind of related to what you guys are talking about right now. So let me pull it up, because they do ask a question. So this is Richard asking, it's always believed that back when I was in middle and high school, the SATs and PSATs were racially biased, contributing to low test scores by most minority groups. Any truth to this? And I think we kind of touched on this a little bit, but does anyone want to expand more on their ideas?
I'm always ready. I know me and Tangela are always ready. I'm like, come on, Tangela, let's go.
Tag, you're it. You're it.
I'm gonna go first. I'm gonna be quick. All right. So 100%, I agree with it. I mean, deeper questions about whose knowledge, whose curriculum,
right?
How we teach, the way that we teach, who is administering the test. Tangela brought that up. I mean, who the belief system of the person administering the exact same biased test could actually change the performance levels, because most academic deficiencies have non-academic root causes. And so I mean, something is in all standardized tests, we've seen this. So they would talk about, someone going and playing baseball in the 9th inning, X, Y, and Z happened. It's a reading comprehension test. But some kids have never played baseball or come from a country that or isn't even on the table. So now the individual that comes from they're talking about American norms and American societal norms and hobbies and experiences. Those people have advantage with background information because they have the context. And so, yes, I believe that SATs, PSATs, all standardized assessments are rooted in middle-class white norms. And so the extent to which an individual or culture is aligned with those middle-class white norms, their performance will be a function of that. So it's not really a function of intelligence, but rather an extent to which your culture and your norms align with the norms of middle class, white norms that predominate our testing and all of our curriculum. Tag to Tangela. Or anybody.
Even something as simple as the word yacht. Like inner city kids, yacht. It's not that they're idiots. Just like you could ask some kid from suburbia, like something that's normally seen or used in the inner city, they may have difficulty. Not that neither one of them could understand it. It could stump you. I've taken those tests before, and you get stuck on a word, and there's something very practical. My family lived in California for a short period of time. And what I noticed at the school that I went to, we would take standardized tests religiously because it was to help us learn to give us test taking skills. Now, move us to Mississippi, rural Mississippi. No, they didn't have the resources. So you pretty much just have to go take the exam. So if you don't have test taking skills, you don't understand that, okay, you're going to have to sit here for this amount of time, teach you how to pace yourself. I did so well in California on those tests. They wanted to give me a double promotion. But of course, my parents were like, no, you're too immature. You don't need to do that. But at any rate, my point is that it does not actually measure your intelligence. And I am so happy, though, that even now people are starting to understand that there isn't just one form of intelligence. And intelligence isn't set. Like the brain, neuroplasticity, the brain can change. But if you have teachers or administrators in schools who believe that, okay, well, Black kids are like this, Hispanics are like this, Japanese kids are like this, then they don't do anything else to push them forward or anything else to encourage them to say, okay, you know what, I know you're struggling right here, but this ABC can happen. I guess my point to all of this is what Ben said as it relates to the racial bias, and then as it relates to something practical as learning how to study for those tests. I mean, just to take those tests is what I'm trying to say, because there are hacks to taking those standardized tests, to be perfectly candid. And may I just say this? Ben mentioned the cuts with the microaggression. I promise you, the other day, when I was attending undergrad at University of Southern Mississippi, I didn't know then what it was. It was microaggressions, but it felt like 1,000 cuts every single day, to the point that at the end of my sophomore year, I had nothing but C's. And I'm not like, I'm pretty even keel, no depression, nothing. First time in my life I ever felt depressed. And there was really no way for me to express what was happening, because I couldn't say, well, he said this, because it would have sounded as if I was just merely complaining. But there were words being thrown at me all the time. And I was one of 2 Black students in this particular major that I was in, undergrad speech pathology. I did nothing with it. But it's almost like I was bleeding slowly every single day. And there's some things that changed, and I'm a Christian, so some things changed in my life, but it was bad. It was bad. So I understand the microaggression and what it does.
But it's all connected, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because I said I'm in the middle of the Central Valley, and if you don't know what that means exactly, there are almond trees across the street from me and vineyards, a block, well, not even a block, like half a mile, because that's how I'm measuring distance out here. I'm the only house out here. So if I go to school in a rural community, what the hell do I know about yachts? I don't even know how to pronounce it, right? So that is so true. It's just acknowledging that the language being used is not equitable. Richard, were you going to say something?
Well, it had to do with the standardized test, but then it also ties into Dilla's discussion about microaggressions and what she was feeling, because and this was an embarrassing time, and Letty will remember this, but we used to have an exit exam for our college level English. And the students go through the whole semester, and then at the end of semester, they had to take this exit exam.
Timed. And
if they didn't get a 3 or a 4 on that exit exam, they had to take that whole semester over.
Wow.
It was such bullshit.
Yeah, there were so many people failing, but they had done this for decades. And so students would fail twice, and then they'd have to go to a college, 50, 60 miles away to get English. And then but they could carry an A in that class the whole time. But that constant peg that, you can't get through that fee, and that constant discussion by the instructors, I think just set them up for failure. Thank BC for getting that out of that mindset. They dropped that fee. We're a guided pathway college. And our graduation rates are starting to skyrocket, and so we see that.
Are they getting jobs? That's what I want to know.
Right.
We don't know that yet. So, but the other thing that's happening in California is the UCs of California are looking at dropping those standardized tests for the very reason that Richard had plopped up in his question. And I think they are biased. I think the exams, from the little fee exit exam that a teacher might have in their classroom, all the way up to the standardized tests that we use for getting into college. And just think of how many people were just taken out of the system with these tests and all the things that we do, and losing out on the intelligence and the creativity, things that are going on, and it breaks my heart. And maybe the systems are getting better, but until you got people like Ben, and if you ever have a chance to go to his presentation, you need to do that, because at the conference we were at, it re-energizes your idea of what you should be doing as a person. And we fought that, Letty and I fought that exit exam for 4 years, trying to say, you've got to stop this. Did studies, gave them data, did everything we could. But then finally, I think because we implemented that whole guided pathway thing, we took it out because too many students were failing.
I mean, it was called a fee. It was called a final exit exam, and it was nicknamed fee. So you had to practice fee to get out of this class. I mean, how?
That's what we call, that's the hidden curriculum of schools. It's the at a structural level. From the individual level, it's a microaggression. At a structural level, it is this imposter syndrome that you want certain people to feel always that you don't really belong, that school was not made for you. The model minority, you're a perpetual foreigner, right? And so let's solidify it. Let's take it at the concrete level. Here's 12th grade English in California is called British literature, Brit Lit. So what we're saying when you're finishing your K-12 experience, the epitome, the crescendo of literature is British literature, aka Shakespearean literature, right? Shakespeare is the point. Well, why? Is it because the language of Shakespeare is more complex than other iterations of English? Well, there's a great TED Talk where a gentleman says Shakespeare or hip hop, and at the beginning of the TED Talk, he gives you lyrics.
I've seen that.
Rap, or is it Shakespeare? And most of the time when you say Shakespeare, it's rap, and most of the time when you do vice versa, it's vice versa. The layering, the double, the triple, the quadruple meanings, not only layering the meanings and the symbolism, but also being able to perform it at the same time and make it rhyme, and the cadence and the flow. You could take so many hip hop songs that really, I believe that one iteration of critical pedagogy, or just even equity and action, is hip hop pedagogy, which is really important. Hip hop is the dominant language of youth culture, and anybody who works with youth should be able to speak that language. But hip hop pedagogy, it's essentially hip hop has a language complexity that exceeds Shakespeare, yet we choose Shakespeare as the high point of English, for not because it's the most intelligent or most advanced, but because it enacts and ensures the ideals of public schooling, right? Our system of schooling, which is to make sure this hierarchy is maintained. Some are at the top and some are below. And so all of those things, from the assessments, the curriculum, the instructional delivery, the call and response method, how we do that, all of those things tell you something about who's valued and who belongs most.
Wow.
Yes. I want to keep talking about education, but we're going to run out of time. And I did want to hit these other points because, we could go over time a little bit. I don't want to keep people longer than they need, especially Tangela.
Oh, you're fine.
Calling you out.
Thank you.
because I wanted to make sure that we hit on, the other topics that she brings up in hate crimes, and then the other health and safety of Asian American women. Also, it's like, I feel like because we're all in education, we keep using that as an example, which is a perfect example because the majority of kids that are being raised in the United States of America are going through our educational system. So they're experiencing these things, they're seeing them, they're hearing them, and then their families are experiencing them in the community. So to me, it's all connected, always. But I feel like every time we have these conversations, the lens always does shift back to education. But crimes exist in the younger communities, also the younger generations. It's not, some of these things are taught at home, values, ideologies. This could be a whole topic unto itself. Any of these things we could do an hour on. Was there anything in the chapter when you read this specific paragraph that kind of brought out maybe something new, something different that you hadn't considered? I think I will say, Tangela, you had mentioned before about just naming the different regions and the different countries and where people come from. To me, that was something that, again, I kind of knew, but unless you really go out and do the educate yourself and read and look at a map, for goodness sake, you're ignorant.
Yeah.
You can't have these conversations.
Yeah. No, that's true. I think when looking at that chapter, actually, I couldn't help but think about what's going on now. But I also attached it to now. Absolutely, it's wrong, and I have to say, I felt like, oh my gosh, that was a Black guy that did that. Oh my gosh. Unfortunately, the Black and Asian community, it's just a history of, I don't know if it's misunderstanding and I just know this from people who grew up in places where they're Black and Asians in the community, because I did not. Just if I had to go by maybe going into a Korean store, the way that, me and my niece or my sister may be looked at or followed, it doesn't justify it, but it just shows you that there is tension there that goes back years. And what I hate is when people say, oh, well, look at them. It was stirred up a long time ago. And I don't know the answers as relates to how to fix that, other than conversations like this, addressing the myth. Because what the model minority myth did was it did exactly what it was supposed to have done, which is drive a wedge, so that there's no solidarity, so that, as Ben mentioned earlier, and a few more of you may have said, and to maintain white male dominance. So whatever needs to be said or done, that's what's going to be said. So we're fighting each other, and then it culminates to something like this. But I won't lie, it's been embarrassing. I told my husband, I said, wow, really? That's an elderly woman. I mean, even if you're gonna be foolish, why go after an elderly woman? Why go after anyone? But I could not understand that. But it's just me thinking out loud. I don't know if someone has something to say.
So I think a lot of times what we find and we view as cultural is a response to oppression. When you take individuals and you put them in oppressed, depressed, suppressed, marginalized situations, then you're taking people and they're fighting for limited resources. They're fighting for the scraps off the table that should not be so. And if you're able to racialize individuals in those situations, then you can ensure that they stay divided. And so there's these different moments in these lands where we've seen race inserted as a way to dehumanize. And one of the most significant ones that were pronounced was in Bacon's Rebellion. And so you had individuals who had European peasants, African peasants, you had people that united against the the white white land-owning males, and they're like, okay, we can't have this.
Have them, yeah.
Well, you might be poor, but at least you're not black, right? And so you're on my team. And it's like, what? You're like dehumanizing me. You're exploiting me, and you're gonna tell me that I'm on your team somehow. Like, and so, but people bought into that, right? And so then that is a way to continue. And you have this mixed history with the Korean store owners. I mean, in the riots after Rodney King's trial, right? You had a Korean store owner. You have this stereotype continue to be promoted through the media. You look at like Menace to Society that came out, and you have the Korean store owners there and stuff. And so you see these things that are sensationalized in the media. The media really, if there's any time a black person does anything to an Asian person, that's going to be like front and center. You're going to see that in the media, even though that's not the reality of what happens most of the time. And so we have to be able to think critically with a critical lens through these things and be able to piece them apart and challenge some of them. Black on black crime. White on white crime is almost the exact same as black on black crime, but nobody talks about white on white crime, right? And so when a black person does something to an Asian person, oh, look at this, the black. Well, hold on, wait a second.
You're right. You're right.
Say that in other situations, and so we have to really be able to like piece these things apart, deconstruct them, and provide counter narratives, because the dominant narrative is rooted in keeping people separated. So this one.
I was thinking, I always thought the division was just related to like a scarcity complex, right? Like there's not enough to go around. Maybe only one minority is getting through, like, because there has been, one minority group just that, that there's not enough to go around.
I appreciate that, Ben. I just wanted to say that because I too need to be mindful of that and not fall into the wrong narrative. Although it did shock my conscience. I was like, oh, wow. But you're right. Everything you said, though, I appreciate that.
Because who's been showing up for the Asian community?
Yeah.
Right? Who's had the Asian communities back? Asian Americans, we struggled often with knowing how to organize and rally and protest and stand up for. And so who showed up for us every single time? I mean, you might not always see in the media, but the black community. Yeah. All day, every day. Why? Who knows? Who understands being mislabeled, oppressed, being disrespected, being dehumanized? Who has been from day one to the present day? It's been the black community. So when you see all this anti-Asian hate, who is standing on the front lines with the Asian people? It's the same people. I mean, I'm gonna bring up this real quick little story. My dad unfortunately was incarcerated, and he was in the California Youth Authority and the Men's State Prison. But when he was incarcerated, he was Japanese. So you got Japanese man, you got white people, you got brown people. You don't have any Asians in prison, right? So, everybody wanted to kill my dad except the black people in the prison because they understood what it's like to be an outcast, to have all eyes against you and everyone to have a target on your back. And so, it's just, I think we have to not only provide counter narratives to the dominant thinking about what's happening, how we interpret the media, but also call out those situations where there's black and Asian solidarity strong. And it's really, even from the activist, I think it's Yuri Kochiyama, who stood with Malcolm X, right? And
I just read about that.
You don't hear that. That's not told in our textbooks. And so we have to educate ourselves to provide these exemplars, to provide to our youth, so that we understand this common struggle that we have with
That's good. That's good.
Real quick before we move on to the next topic, Natalie, I wanted to say that thank you for sharing that, because I think a lot of us have to kind of deal with that with our own, implicit biases. And then there's because we live in this culture, there's a meme, I think, or a graphic that says something about equality not being pie, and that there's more than just like a slice of pie to go around for everybody. I totally screwed that up, and I couldn't pull it up in time to show it to you, but it's something like that. It says like, why are you so worried? Like, it's not pie. There's more left to go around. We're not going to run out. Everybody can be equal and things can be more equitable. Now, I do understand that maybe for white people, it feels like they're losing something, right? They're losing some kind of power or control, but it's not pie, people. Okay. Along the same lines that you were just describing now, this idea that the myth, the creation of the myth is used to separate Asian Americans from other people of color. And we have to remember who we're talking about here, right? BIPOC people and non-Black people of color, because there's also the anti-Blackness that Ben brought up at the beginning of the conversation, that we all have to deal, like I said, with those implicit biases. So when we look at things like that, like Natalie's saying, I have to remember that we're not necessarily competing for those kinds of things. It's you know, if I want to make something equitable, I'm fighting to make it equitable for as many people as possible. It's not just because I'm Latina that I'm only doing it for the Latino population, the Latina population. And then this, at the end of the chapter that I love, we have to stop believing the hype. And I like the idea that it's hype, right? Use this word. We're not in competition for the biggest slice of the white supremacist pie. And I'm sorry, I couldn't pull up the graphic, but this is true. It's like understanding where we're fitting into the system and where we're benefiting from the system, so that we acknowledge that, look how it's affecting the people around us, and then what am I doing to make it more equitable? Am I fighting for white supremacist pie that's probably like the pie from The Help, I'm imagining? That's how I see it. Richard, you haven't said anything in a while.
Well, it is that the white supremacist pie, and sometimes I think about the strategy, and when we have discussions, we often think of the white people strategizing behind the scenes, but that's not what it's this system of ingrained idea that you have some sort of superiority, and you don't even know yourself where it came from. And I wonder often is, to have a model minority, was that just to sort of relieve a little guilt to say, well, look, it's not my fault. Look, other minorities can be successful, and so we created that myth, and so as we start to go back, I tell you, more and more as people become more educated, especially in the history of our country and the things that took place, more and more we understand as a people together that these things did happen. We weren't taught correctly of the history of our country, and the more I learned, I get embarrassed for being white often, and sort of the same feeling you had. A Black person, beat up an old lady, but that embarrassment is there, and call it fragility, call it whatever you want. But it is, yeah, I know. It is that emotional side of me that starts to just sit back and listen, and that's why I try not to say too much. So, but I really appreciate the opportunity to just listening and learning. There was also something recently about listening and learning, and how what are you going to do with all that learning you've been doing? So I'm constantly calling Richard out. It's okay, it's fine. We're going to work through this together. Okay, we're gonna wrap up in a couple of minutes. Does anyone have any sort of last parting nuggets that they want to share about the model minority myth, or maybe some ways that you've already maybe been in the schools that you've been in, Natalie in your school, Terrence on the work that you're doing, combating it a little bit? Any examples?
Yeah, I stand in solidarity with one another. Recognize that we're not fighting against one another. We're not fighting against white people. We're fighting against white supremacy, right? And it takes individuals. I mean, go to Cesar Chavez with the United Farm Workers. there was a point where they couldn't push the agenda for the farm workers to be treated with dignity until they united with the Filipino farm workers.
Right.
And that pushed it forward. And so it's always been about people collectively. And we come from collectivist cultures anyhow. That's ingrained in who we are. Uniting together and recognizing that we cannot use the master's tools to dismantle the master's house, as Audre Lorde said. Right? We're not using those tools. And so we're using different tools. And that's why, like Richard said, we're all learning together. We're sitting, we're listening, we're learning, because we've all been traumatized and socialized by this system since 5 years old that has told us what school is supposed to look like. And so we stand in solidarity with one another. Black history is American history. You do stuff for Black History Month, everybody's engaged in it, not just Black folk, right? You do things for ethnic studies, and we're going to do an Asian Pacific Islander class. We're not just putting Asian kids in there. This ethnic studies pedagogy, the ideals of it are for all students. And so as we continue to decolonize our mind and understand all of us have been pushed to the margins, so then everything we do in school should be to bring us to the center and unite us together in our collective struggle that we have with one another, recognizing there's enough at the table. Every stakeholder should have a stake to hold, and everyone gets a seat at the table. When we do that, that's how we dismantle these practices that are discriminatory.
Yes.
Yay.
Yes.
Who wants to follow that?
I don't follow that. I don't. That was personal, but I want to do a plug because I watched yesterday. I don't know if you guys are fans or not, but last week tonight with John Oliver is HBO. If you've not watched that, you need to watch yesterday's episode because it's talking about the minority, and it was exceptional. And
yeah, his people called my people, and we collaborated. You didn't see me on this. My name's in the credits.
And something that Ben said that sticking with me, and I'm going to be thinking about this a long time, is the white supremacy runs through all our veins, and a lot of the discussions that we've been having, and it gets me emotional, and I appreciate that comment because that is something I can hold for me, and I will constantly think of that because that's a struggle on this battle we're fighting. It's for lack of a better word, the infectious properties of that white supremacy, which is spread throughout our community, and our experience in communicable diseases with COVID-19. I'm thinking of that and that spread, and I appreciate what y'all had to say today. But that was one statement that really has got me thinking. So I appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, I'll close with saying this, that I agree with Ben. It's atmospheric. There's no way that the ideology of white supremacists has not touched all of us. It's in our water, everywhere we go. From the moment your child can watch television, they're being socialized to believe a narrative of racial hierarchy, that there are people who are inherently better and worse, and they should be treated accordingly. And so everything that we do has to be intentional. That was socialization is intentional. So oftentimes when I meet people who say, "Oh, well, no, I'm not like that," well, then you've not been properly socialized, because the truth is you may not be aware, but more than likely something has touched you. Something you believe something. Just watch your reactions to certain things. But I would just encourage people to be intentional, be mindful of what you're thinking. If, for instance, and it will happen, another police shooting of an unarmed Black person, happens, is your first reaction, "Oh, well, what was she doing? What was he doing? What's the criminal record?" Why is that your first reaction other than, "Oh my gosh, a loss of life"? Just ask yourself, why am I viewing things this way? And very last thing, I promise, I will ask someone, do you think that people of color are suffering from, collective delusion? Because it's almost as if people will believe 1,000 people who agree with them
Mhm.
against millions of people of color who are saying this is what's happening. So it's a choice. So we all have to be very intentional in what we think and how we view other people.
Confirmation bias.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the idea that the anti-racist mindset, or being an anti-racist, like if you read Dr. Kendi's book and listen to the new podcast that's dropping, it's not even a daily choice. It's like a situational choice. How many times a day are you having to kind of think, okay, what is, like Tangela, just like what you're saying, you can't go through a day without having a thought like that. But are we catching them? What are we doing about them? And then how are we teaching our kids? And how are we dealing with our students? Natalie, did you have any last little nuggets of truth?
I'm just excited to have opportunity to listen and learn from everybody. I try to run different girls groups every couple months, and one of the last ones, we look at why there's division, and so this is just exciting, to hear different ideas from Ben and hearing from everybody that we can bring into the group, because I try to have them. We go back to history. I mean, why might there be division amongst us, and what can we do because we're stronger when we're unified? So this is just really supported, kind of wanting to continue to seek those opportunities out.
Cool. I'm glad you were able to join us today. Okay, I'm going to, the last thing I'm going to talk about that's related to this in a way, we're talking about bringing people together, is food. And like my dream is to constantly have like access to some kind of festival where I can go and eat just like all kinds of different kinds of food. That's my dream. Maybe I can make it happen. But there's a new show on Netflix. I don't know if you guys have seen this. It's called High on the Hog. It's on Netflix. It's 5 or 6 episodes, I think. And I've only seen the first one, but I've read through the description. And it's the idea that the way that food is tied into culture and the way it brings people together, and then how where the origins of food kind of spread out across the globe, right? Depending on where the food came from. And so the first episode is talking about the Gold Coast and the transatlantic slave trade, and some of the food that came across. It's fascinating. It's emotional. I cried and I was hungry. The food looked amazing, spicy. It's like it just looked really, I love food shows, and so I highly recommend that, because I think food is one of those things that helps to transcend some of the issues that we're having. We could get together. Let's get together and potluck. Everybody bring something. Also, I want to remind everyone that June is Pride Month. So, in the same way that we have to learn our history, origins of this country. It's important that we acknowledge and learn about other parts of our community that maybe we're not a part of. I think everyone has family that's part of the LGBTQ community, or they have students, or some way or another they know someone who's impacted, and it's important to get online, use Google to look stuff up. Netflix is a great place to, they make it, I say this every time I talk about watching things. Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, they make it so easy for you to go find things to watch if that's your preferred method of getting information. It's documentaries and shows. You can read books, watch movies, do all those things this month, but also every day of every year for the rest of your life. Also, next week we're going to be talking about Al Sharpton and this idea that how do you move forward and have these conversations in a civilized manner if I hate Al Sharpton.
What?
Good one. Tangela's going to be joining us next week. We have a couple other guests joining us as well. This is the next chapter in the book. I didn't pick these topics, okay? Don't send me any hate mail. This is next week. Okay, thank you all for being here today. This conversation has been amazing. I hope we can continue to have these conversations in another way. We'll read another book and we'll all get together and talk about it. And then I'll plan the potluck and everybody can bring food. Okay. Thank you to everyone who is online. Thank you to the comments, and we'll see you next week.
Great conversation. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.